Before I make some remarks, this coincides with the president's dinner, from what I understand. So Nancy Tippins, as head of the SIOP Foundation, has asked to go first to say a few words, and I invite her to the podium.
Thank you all for accommodating my schedule. I apologize for the difficulty. My name is Nancy Tippins, and I'm here both to remember Frank and the contributions he made to our profession, as well as represent the SIOP Foundation. Frank's work in meta-analysis has had a profound impact on the work of many of us, including myself. His systematic approach to synthesizing research findings across multiple studies provided a rigorous and quantitative means of evaluating the relative effectiveness of various selection procedures. Because of his work, practitioners like me are able to identify the instruments that are most likely to be valid predictors of job performance, and that enables not only the development and implementation of more effective selection procedures, but also the wise use of human and capital resources in organizations. I want to share one little personal vignette of my interactions with Frank. I did not have the privilege of working with Frank, but I certainly knew who he was. He was one of the brilliant minds of IO psychology. In the late 1990s, we were arguing over the revisions to the 1999 standards for educational and psychological testing. If you remember, that was a very controversial revision, and there was lots of back and forth, and it took many, many years to work that out. And we were at a conference like this, and we were asking questions of a panel of people who were on the joint committee that wrote the standards. And I asked the panel a question. I don't even remember the question now, but it was about the implications of a particular standard for people who work in practice like me. And the person who responded to my question really didn't answer it. You know, we have many people who are good at sort of tap dancing around the answer. And this person kept, yeah. And Frank finally said, "You need to answer Nancy's question. It's a really good one." It was the highlight of my career for Frank Schmidt to have said I had a good question. I was so proud of myself. It was really wonderful. In 2015, Frank established the Schmidt-Hunter Fund to recognize advances in meta-analysis that are documented in published research. The MOU between Frank and the SIOP Foundation states that the emphasis on the award is on the methodological quality and conceptual and theoretical qualities and the implications for practice now and in the future. Since 2017, the work of 7 different groups of researchers have been recognized with the Schmidt-Hunter Meta-Analysis Award. This award highlights a meta-analysis published in the last 3 years that exhibits the highest level of methodological and theoretical quality and yields potential implications for IO psychology. The SIOP Foundation is grateful to Frank for his munificent initial donation to start the fund, and to his many friends and family who have appreciated his work and honored his memory with their own generous donations to this fund. Frank's dedication to the advancement of knowledge will benefit countless researchers and practitioners for years to come. Thank you, Frank, for your visionary contributions to our field and your commitment to ensuring ongoing research and meta-analysis. Thank you all.
Thank you for that, Nancy. I would like to take a few minutes now to talk through a little bit about my memories of Frank, but then also give you a little bit of biographical information about him, because I'm not sure that everybody knows all the breadth of things that his family, that I sort of gathered over the years. So that's what I would like to do for the next 10 minutes or so. And then I will open it up for anybody to come up to the podium and share their memories and their thoughts. As we approach what would have been his 80th birthday in just 10 days, I find comfort in believing that he would have been delighted to see us here gathered today in remembrance and celebration of his legacy. I would like to first spend a few minutes to share an overview of Frank's life and contributions, and also some of my own thoughts. I met Frank 36 years ago when I started the PhD program in management at the University of Iowa, the program that he put on the scholarly map. As most of you know, Frank was my doctoral advisor, mentor, academic father, as well as my friend. I learned psychometrics, validity generalization, meta-analysis, personnel selection from him. He opened my eyes to the importance of general mental ability for everything that we do in life. We shared a passion for individual differences in research. We published much together. I learned a great deal from Frank in terms of life outlook as well. His sudden death in August of 2021 left all of us in his academic family bereft. We lost our intellectual father, and the world has lost an intellectual giant. I would like to share with you a bit about Frank's biography, highlight his research contributions and impact, as the whole gamut may not be well known to everyone. Remember him for the character and the mensch that he was. First, his biography. Frank was born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1944, the oldest of 6 children in a farm family with only grade school level education. He was the oldest of 5 boys, all born 1 year after the other. Per Frank's description, his teenage years was a time and place where kids were allowed to play and experiment, and he did experiment. At age 7, camped out alone, shot guns, BB guns, pellet guns, real guns, climbed trees, built tree houses. At age 9, drove tractors, pickups on the farm. His parents were so busy with work and younger kids that he had, and I quote, the privilege and freedom to raise himself. His words, privilege and freedom to raise himself. He experimented a lot. In elementary school, he made knives, sold them at school. He built arrows, he built crossbow, he made a sword. He collected arrowheads and developed a big collection of them, but also read the World Book Encyclopedia cover to cover. In high school, he had strong interests in biology and evolutionary theory, and he had advanced placement in biology when he entered Bellarmine College in 1962. He was the first in his family to attend college. As a sophomore, Frank became interested in applied psychology, especially psychological measurement. He graduated summa cum laude in psychology and was awarded a Woodrow Wilson Graduate Fellowship. He could have taken that to any of the 9 IO psychology programs that accepted him, but Purdue at the time, and this is his opinion, was the best of all IO programs in the country. And when they offered him a National Defense Education Act fellowship, which paid a lot more than the Woodrow Wilson one, he went there. The NDEA Act was passed by Congress in response to Sputnik, which went up in 1958. And Frank always said, thanks to Russians, he received that scholarship. At Purdue, he received a first-class training infused with quantitative psychology. Here is a list of his classmates. I'm sure you will recognize many of the luminaries of our field on that list. He took measurement and individual differences with Owens, psychometrics with Brogden, statistics with Weiner. Although Tiffin was his advisor, he was most influenced by Brogden. His interest in the complexities of data analysis began with his dissertation, which showed via computer simulation that regression weights estimated on sample sizes typical of psychological research perform poorly than simple equal weights. His first job was at Michigan State. During Frank's first year on the faculty at Michigan State, he and Jack Hunter began a research collaboration that lasted until Jack's death in 2002. They co-invented psychometric meta-analysis. He was promoted and given tenure only after 3 years at Michigan State. But a desire for real-world applications of psychology led him to take a research position at the Personnel Research and Development Center at the U.S. Civil Service Commission in 1974. As the largest practitioner of personnel selection in the world, the Civil Service Commission, now known as the Office of Personnel Management, provided many interesting applied and basic problems and free time free of academic duties to focus on these problems. A great deal of Frank's research was conducted during this period. These will give you a glimpse of the topics that he was publishing on during his first decade, and with whom. During his second decade, this is what it looks like. In 1985, Frank accepted a chaired position in the Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa, where he remained a professor emeritus after retiring in 2012. And there, he produced a whole lot of graduate students. This is what his third decade of publication yields, as well as his co-authors. For 20 years, he was also a senior scientist with Gallup. During this time, he was publishing still on meta-analysis, and there are his authors. During his last decade, in retirement, he was still publishing on average 3 articles per year and still working on projects. When you put it all together, this is his entire publication record. Meta-analysis, validity generalization, selection, tests, most importantly, perhaps, implications of them for real world. And his co-authors, starting with Perlman, McDaniel, Judish, Owens, Vishveshwaran, Lay, O, and Harter, and inescapably Hunter. Very briefly, his scientific work and contributions. He published over 230 journal articles and book chapters, 7 books, 4 of them on meta-analysis. His current H-index is 104. For his contributions, he was given the most prestigious prizes in psychology and management, including the Losey Award from SHRM, the APA Gold Medal, and the Dunette Prize from SIOP. All of these awards are for lifetime contributions to the applications of psychology. Frank demonstrated every quality of the scientific method: objectivity, desire for truth, open-mindedness, skepticism, rationality, confidence in empiricism, and measurement. He was a paradigm-shifting scientist, a father of meta-analytic techniques, and an ardent and intellectually honest researcher of individual differences. His contributions not only transformed entire fields of psychological and management inquiry, but also extended to hundreds of other fields where psychometric meta-analyses have become the bedrock of scientific knowledge. Together with Jack Hunter, they invented a set of statistical techniques collectively known as psychometric meta-analysis, initially in IO psychology, and transformed employee selection research. But the influence of Frank's work extended far beyond work psychology and management, leading to applications of meta-analysis in all areas of psychological inquiry, resulting in an epistemological paradigm shift in how scientific knowledge is created and updated. Furthermore, the impact of meta-analysis extended to diverse disciplines. The contribution of meta-analysis is not due to its popularity among researchers. The true influence of meta-analysis stems from its ability to answer large research questions with more consistency, robustness, and power than conventional empirical research techniques. Frank's development and continuous improvements of meta-analysis methods, detailed in his 4 highly influential and widely cited books, numerous research articles, are considered to be his greatest scientific achievement. In his own field of work psychology and management for 50 years, Frank researched and demonstrated the potent and persistent role of individual differences, primarily general mental ability, as well as non-cognitive variables such as integrity. One other thing, meta-analysis is epistemologically unique, as the technique focuses on making use of all available data, uncovering the truth, and testing generalizability. By using all available data, meta-analyses democratize science. In this realm, I learned from Frank that scientific facts are not discovered or established by single studies or single study scientists. Now, Frank the character and Frank and his character. Frank cared about his students and was an advocate for junior scientists. His door was open to all students for general assistance and advice. With all that he had accomplished, he could be intimidating, but he used good humor and little jokes to put the anxious at ease. He had countless colleagues, students, friends all around the world. When Frank met someone, he was attentive, without prejudice, and engaged. To those who had the good fortune of meeting him in person, he transcended impressive accomplishments. With his vast knowledge about every conceivable topic, childlike curiosity, gentleness, and good humor, he was memorable. Dependable and generous, he made a mark on many lives. He rallied to those with insurmountable problems, especially those in his personal and professional family, with strength and understanding. Even though he had his own share of personal tragedies, he was the guide that all of us turn to in times of need. Frank loved simple things too: reading, having intellectual discussions, taking walks, hunting, collecting, traveling, cultural events, having a good food and drink. He was a student of life. With insatiable curiosity, learning was the focal point of his life. He was open to new ideas and information, professionally and personally. Always quick to learn, he had many interests and took up new hobbies. His great thirst for knowledge kept him intellectually young and vital. I once asked Frank for the adjectives that he would use to describe himself. His response, and I quote, "Persistent, dogged, I keep plodding along. If I think an idea has merit, I keep pursuing it. Also, iconoclastic. I've always liked to challenge the conventional wisdom of the day." Not relying on self-reports, some time ago, I gathered informant data. His cardinal traits: openness to ideas, achievement striving, and assertiveness. On the old school California psychological inventory, he would have been off the charts on the achievement via independence scale. Given his professional stature and accomplishments, Frank could be intimidating. He had little patience for foolishness, intellectual dishonesty, or cowardice. With a few sentences, he could reduce critics' arguments to ashes. Yet none of his criticisms were ever personal. He was interpersonally gentle, caring, and considerate. Even his critics were disarmed by his irreverent humor, uninhabited curiosity. He was not judgmental and thrived on all forms of diversity. Frank left behind a momentous intellectual legacy that continues to shape the future of work psychology and management, to be sure, but also the future of science in general. If he were here today, he would be talking to us in one way or another about how to detect and correct the lies that data tell. He offered an elegant and quantitative way of knowing. He was greater than life, and his legacy lives on in those whose intellects continue to be shaped by the ideas that he introduced. Now, we have set up a website, as you may have discovered, on Frank Schmidt, where you can go to get all sorts of information about him, his impact, his messages that were shared about him, his biography, and so on and so forth. And if you are considering to continue commemorating him, we invite you to consider a contribution to either the Schmidt and Hunter Meta-Analysis Award Fund that SIOP was established at the SIOP Foundation, or the Frank Schmidt Family Meta-Analysis Graduate Fellowship at the University of Iowa. In case you may have difficulty locating how to get to those sources to donate your funds, we put on that webpage where you can go and click and go to where you can make your contribution. With that, I'm going to turn it to anybody who would like to come up and share their thoughts, their memories about Frank.
Good evening. It's a bittersweet moment for all of us, I'm sure. Jim Scharf and I had the privilege of working side by side with Frank on a number of different venues. We first met back in Washington post Griggs versus Duke Power, which was settled by the unanimous Supreme Court in 1971, in which the Warren Court read into Title VII a results-oriented definition of discrimination, which led to adverse impact. Having said that, the court, having read adverse impact into the law, which is nowhere found in legislative history, I suspect that in our lifetime we will see adverse impact read out of the law, but that's another story. Frank was recruited by the Office of Personnel Management because they had been successfully challenged in court on the Federal Service Entrance Exam that in which the Federal Service, then Civil Service Commission, tried to argue that, saying that the federal employee needs to know how to read and how to deal with numbers. Now, today we would call that verbal and quantitative, or GMA, general mental ability. So Frank was recruited specifically from Michigan State to deal with the street that Frank and I were both walking down. The street was called the Uniform Guidelines on Employee Selection Procedures. On the far side of the street, Frank was working with the biggest employer in the United States. This is pre-Walmart days. And on my side of the street were three regulatory bodies: the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs in the Department of Labor, and EEOC, where I had been recruited because I used to have my MBA students take on the then chief psychologist from EEOC. I taught them enough about employment testing that they could give a plausible go-around with late Bill Ennis, who was then the chief psychologist at EEOC. So for the next 4 years, beginning in '74, the weekly negotiation of the uniform guidelines continued. Frank working and introducing us with what had been peer-reviewed in the Journal of Applied Psychology on the contribution of meta-analysis to validity generalization. Of course, in Washington, everything goes with an acronym, so it became known as VG. And the word Schmidt-Hunter was one word. Schmidt-Hunter. That was one word. The lawyers with whom I worked derisively called Schmidt-Hunter the Michigan State Marching Band. But so the fact is, the Civil Rights Bar had, I would say, a lack of enthusiasm for validity generalization, and saying a lack of enthusiasm is much of an understatement. In fact, the Civil Rights Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law said explicitly, if this VG, validity generalization, is accepted, no more employer, never again would an employer have to do a validity study. So the uniform guidelines that ultimately were issued by EEOC and the other three agencies, the Civil Service Commission, the Department of Labor, Department of Justice, and EEOC, incorporated language that in fact reflected not the findings of the science of validity generalization, but rather three components that were specifically what I would call the state of art of IO psychology, industrial psychology in those days, and Division 14 of APA, if you will. They incorporated what we would call single group validity and situational specificity. In addition to that, they stuck their proverbial finger in Frank's eye by saying, if you're going to generalize validity, you can only do it with behaviorally comparable jobs. So jobs had to have virtually the same behavior. Of course, Frank's work was a contribution to show that GMAs, general mental abilities, were the basis for transporting validity across uses. So Schmidt and Hunter, Frank became obviously very much aware of the lack of enthusiasm, to say the least, of the Civil Rights Bar for the findings of meta-analysis and the conclusions of validity generalization. And Frank moved on to University of Iowa. As Denise had pointed out, I had the privilege over the years of flying in the middle of winter in Cedar Rapids to meet with Frank's students and at the Roadhouse on the way back to speaking to his class the next day. I remember out at the University of Iowa. Frank and I also published together on fairness and employment testing with Linda Godfredson. I also had in that point, after Frank had left town, working with Ron sitting in the front row here. Ron had an ABD from Nebraska, but decided for strange reasons to go to law school instead of finishing up. So he had a law practice there in Washington that I was asked to contribute on plaintiff class actions litigation involving representing the black agency at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and follow up similar class action challenging the promotion practices at the Secret Service. So Ron and I became working together. And shortly thereafter, Frank and I were asked, worked together collaboratively to do a validity generalization general defense of American College Testing, ACT's work keys. And I think that was probably one of the biggest, certainly the biggest writing cooperative project that the two of us engaged in over the time. So I've had the privilege of working with Frank, working with his son Ron, and I can only say VG is alive and well today. In fact, Jack Hunter and I had the privilege of testifying in a case in which VG was affirmed by the Fifth Circuit, the highest affirmation of validity generalization to date in the courts. But I also can't escape the fact that VG lives to this day because one of his students, Mike McDaniel, passed a button around a couple of years ago at SIOP, and it said, "I got VG from Frank Schmidt."
Anybody who wants to say a few words, just come on up.
Hello everyone, I'm Insuo at Temple University. I've always regarded Frank and still regard Frank as my academic father. While I was doing my PhD at Iowa, Frank actually was my father and friend and teacher and co-author. So I actually have a lot of mixed emotion at this point. And one thing I remember about Frank is that obviously he's a great scholar. Everyone knows that, so I'm not going to talk about that much. But I want to talk about a few things he wrote in his memoir. I actually read his memoir again on flight to Chicago a few days ago. And I found that he was a great son. At age 7, Frank, using copper tubing, made 2 bracelets and 1 ring for his mom. And his mom wore that until she died. And then it was passed back to Frank. And one thing great about that, as I think about the situation, like if you wear copper bracelet, then you're gonna have some printing on your neck, right? And Frank's mom knew that actually wearing that is not that healthy. And some people may not want to wear that, but she wore that until she died. And that means I think Frank had a really great mom, and he was a great son. I'm surprised by that. And I also felt sorry for my mom. I never made anything for my mom. Actually, I bought a lot for my mom, but I kind of thought that I should have done that before, and I kind of learned something from Frank again. And also, I think when I was really angry with some reviewer, Frank told me one thing which I cannot forget forever. And also, I want to share that with you all. He said, "Insu, I think the best revenge is living well. Don't feel bad. Things can happen, so just move on." And I learned it at that point. That's how Frank became a great scholar. He must have a lot of rejections. He published 200 articles. That means he must gotten more than 500 rejections. So then I learned that, okay, I think all the success comes after enduring rejections. So that's also something I learned from his book and also my casual conversation with Frank. And one time also Frank told me that no God, no glory. Maybe you guys heard that. And while he said that, actually, when I was a PhD student in Iowa, something very interesting happened. So Robert Sternberg, maybe many of you guys know the name, and he was one of the candidates for the president of University of Iowa. So at the time, the school allowed us to have a meeting, so I even could attend the meeting. And Frank and I were sitting together. And Frank actually nudged me to ask a question. What do you think about like something he didn't want to answer, like a range restriction and the importance of intelligence? Frank really, I think, raised his hand and then asked me a question. When Frank raised his hand, he used his finger okay, like this way rather than this one. And then he kind of made Bob Sternberg feel very uncomfortable. And he told me that you got to have that kind of gut. That way, I think you can become a good scholar and also frank scholar. So I think I learned I need to have gut. So that's one thing I remember. And then also another thing I remember from him, from conversation from him is he often say that perfect is the enemy of good enough. So there are some scholars who are saying that we don't have perfect solution to some problem. It's better not to do anything about that because we don't have perfect solution. But Frank always believed that what we can do is getting closer to the truth. So I think he believes that done is better than perfect. And I cherish that in my own research and in my life. No one's gonna be perfect. So I think we gotta do something about that. And just one other thing, I think even though Frank really emphasized the role of intelligence for many things, life outcomes, job performance, and all kinds of important criteria. But one thing I think I can say is that I left Iowa after I got my PhD, and then 1 year, I don't know which year, 2012, 2013, Frank started talk about his date. And a few months later, he said, I think I'm gonna get married. So at the time, I was a bit surprised. Yeah, I know you're dating, but you don't have to marry at that age. He was close to 70, and you guys can live together. But then he said, I think, the reason I want to marry is that I think I found the right one. And I asked him, what's that? And he said, intellectual fit. So, here, Frank's wife, Cindy here, and even in terms of marriage, after his two difficult marriages, he learned that I think intelligence is really important. And I was too late because I was married. I'm still married 23 years, but if I could go back, and my wife is not here, by the way, that's why I can say that, and I'm gonna actually practice that intellectual fit.
So the event is being recorded.
Oh, really? Yeah. Please remove this from me. And the last thing I think, even though Frank emphasized intelligence, he valued DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. One thing I clearly remember that from his memoir at age 8, he thought that atheists, because he's from Louisville, Kentucky, there are not many atheists. So he had an assumption that atheists must have some sort of horns. But when I got to meet them, he found that they are just normal people. And in his memoir, this is what Frank wrote. I learned not to reach conclusions about people without meeting them. So one thing can I tell you about this is the last one. When I was a PhD student, in my first year especially, my spoken English was really bad. I think Frank could understand me maybe 70%, 80%. But you know what? Frank was the only faculty member who asked me, what did you say? What do you mean? Can you say that again? Can you rephrase? Frank tried to understand me 100% all the time. Sometimes Frank said, what? And I actually felt down, obviously. But then I asked him, Frank, can you add a few more words? What did you say? Rather than just what? So I think Frank was kind enough to understand me, and also that helped me a lot to become a better scholar and become a better speaker. So I guess because of that, I'm here and teaching at our university in the U.S. Obviously, I think I still need to improve a lot in many aspects, but Frank actually helped me a lot all those years. And my memory with Frank is actually a lot, I think, and I cannot express my gratitude enough to him and to his teaching and his work ethic and all sorts of things. But one thing I want to actually mention now is that Frank, once again, thanks so much for your help, and I really miss your smile/smirk, and also I think I miss his being blunt to me sometimes. So I really appreciate everything he has done for me. And I also appreciate your coming to this session, and thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Rodney Lohman, and I wanted to just speak briefly about Frank's early days at Michigan State when I was a graduate student there. Is there anyone else who was on the faculty or a graduate student at Michigan State when Frank was there? Okay, I can say whatever I want. So Frank was there when I went to graduate school at Michigan State in IO psychology. He was a phenomenon then, but the phenomenon was still developing. Jack Hunter was also there, of course, and I had the interesting experience of taking psychometrics with Jack Hunter. And Frank's style was a little different than Jack's as a professor. One of Jack's favorite sayings was, "Well, that's false." But not everybody had the understanding of why it was false, and he wasn't necessarily one that spent a lot of time explaining it. Frank, in contrast, was extremely patient with students, even though he did not suffer slightly, but he had incredible halo effect for graduate students, and we tried to live up to that. At Michigan State, in contrast to later, I guess, the door was not always open with Frank because he was doing so much. He had to put some limits on things. He kept his telephone in the drawer, and he might be in his office and he wouldn't answer it. You're kind of wondering, well, why is the phone in the drawer? I think it was not to have the distraction. We were not at Michigan State terribly happy at the recruitment that Jim described of taking him away to the Office of Personnel Management. He had done a huge amount at Michigan State, but some of us who were, kind of students there for a short period of time with him, overlapping with him, we had looked forward to, more contact during graduate school. I did have the pleasure of having Frank chair my master's thesis. Fortunately, I got most of it done in my first year there because he was gone after that. But he was also one that, so many of the things that Denise was talking about spoke to his courage, and he was interested in making an impact, not just within psychology or IO psychology, but in the broader world. He took on tough problems. He was the most fearless person I've ever seen to get up in a group when something hot like adverse impact and so forth was being discussed, and he could hold his own, of course, but he also didn't back away. He used data to support his points, and he was tolerant in terms of hearing other points of view. I had the pleasure over the course of my career of running into Frank from time to time, extremely supportive, and someone who if you worked with him and got to know him, you were a lifelong colleague and friend. And it is wonderful to think about the contributions that he made, and it's sad to think about his loss. So we'll miss him already. Thank you.
everyone. My name is Hong Su. I am an associate professor at the University of Iowa in the department where Frank used to work and teach for much of his career. So compared to many of you, I, who has a long history of working with Frank and being mentored by Frank, my personal interaction with Frank, is relatively short. I started out my academic career at Purdue University, where Frank was an alumni. So he came to visit several times and came to the reception. And later, after I came to Iowa, Frank would come to visit me, and we frequently chat about meta-analysis and other methods. So I'll keep my my recollection short as well. So obviously Frank has impacted all of us through his intellectual contributions. But to me, what I remember the most dearly about Frank is that after I started at Iowa, Frank would, every time I published a new paper, Frank would email me and congratulate me, and he would have already read the paper and would have comments on the paper. And no one else does that. No other senior colleagues in my life does that so frequently, and to me that shows that Frank really cared, and it's pure sense of intellectual care that he really cares about the work. And occasionally he would come and he would sit in my office and we talk about various methods, topics. And we would debate, we would debate about meta-regression, and sometimes he'd debate with me about polynomial regression. And to me, that's really important because Frank is a towering figure, not just in terms of his intellectual contribution, but also in terms of his height. And I'm a lowly little assistant professor, right? So, and the fact that Frank treated me as an intellectual equal, and he would be willing to talk, like Denise said, without prejudice, engage without prejudice, and just talk about these intellectual matters. Really, it's really a big deal for me, and I cannot say this is true for everybody. I've met other important people who do not do that. So, so I think Frank made a huge impact on me, not just intellectually, but also through his character. So, thank you.
I'm Jürgen Deller from the University of Lüneburg, and many of you may be surprised that I'm standing here, but I want to share you unforgettable moments with Frank Schmidt that I have had. Also I've learned something today. Now I know why Denise many years ago gave me a slip of paper and she wrote on it, "Persistence pays off." Now I know where that comes from. So I learned so much. In my academic studies, I came across the famous Schmidt and Hunter piece in the very early 90s. I know it's a little older, but I read it in German, and in a book edited by Martin Kleinman. So I read that there, and later on, again, Denise supported the first European postdoc workshop for advanced organizational psychology, and thank you for putting some of the photos on here. There it is. This is it. And Frank is there in the back, I believe. The tallest guy, of course. Yeah. So I was able to have Frank Schmidt for a full week in Berlin, which surprised me a lot. I got to know him personally then, and I would like to share a story. His family will remember that in September 2008 he had a broken foot or leg, I don't remember, but he finally did come with the cast on, and if I remember correctly, he tried to come in time. However, the weather was not on his side. You had a blizzard or a snowstorm, so he could not fly from Iowa to O'Hare to catch his flight to Berlin. So I have learned how persistent he is. The next day, went to the airport again, caught the flight, flew to Berlin. I picked him up at Tegel Airport, and I took him to the postdoc workshop. And there he met, and we learned that today, and I read the names today on another slide, people he knew from Michigan State, because I had invited Neil Schmidt as well, and Kara. And I learned that three of them were together doing their PhD, if I remember correctly. This is some years ago. And they had not met each other with so much time for many, many years. And you saw another photograph with them having ice cream together in Berlin, the three of them. So I got to know him as a very persistent person, but also as a very personal and friendly person. We talked about the history of German immigration to the United States, and a few weeks later I did find a book in my mail on exactly that. Where did the German immigrants go to? What kind of reasons did they have to immigrate? So he remembered all those little things, and I will never forget that. Thank you.
Oh, I forgot one thing.
Sorry. 3 weeks ago, one of the German participants of this workshop was awarded the Best Professor of Germany Award, Bertolt Meyer in Chemnitz. And I talked to him, and he told me that according to his knowledge, at least 6 participants of this workshop, with of course the contribution of Frank Schmidt, they are now full tenured professors in Germany. So he has had lots of academic impact, and Denise, thank you for making it possible. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Mike McDaniel. I believe I was Frank's last PhD student at George Washington University before he took off for Iowa. They bribed him multiple years in a row by permitting him to shoot quail, in addition to giving a talk. Huh? Pheasant. Okay, pheasants. I don't know my birds, particularly to shoot. Shooting is one thing I wanted to mention. Denise and Vish were graduate students at Iowa and used the money they got from the university to bring me out to give a talk. And I stayed in Frank's house and hung out with him for the weekend. And one thing he wanted to do was entertain me while I was there. So he said, I was going to take you fishing, but it's kind of drizzling, so we can go and shoot, what was I shooting?
No,
Clay pigeon type things. And I'd seen shotguns in magazines before, but he assumed that, you're a guy, you're 30 and you should, you'll be all right on the shooting range there. So he gave me a shotgun and we walked out, and if you're shooting this with two people, you never turn to face them, so you don't see how they're holding their gun because you're holding a loaded shotgun, which I had never held before in my life. And he assumed I had, and we're shooting, and I'm not hitting anything, of course. And the guy who's firing the clay things in the air just comes over and shows me how to hold the gun. And Frank just went, because he just opened his mouth and stared, because he just figured I've been standing next to a guy who has no idea about shotguns. So he suggested we go do something else after that. When I didn't work with Frank until I was done my coursework, and my last course was his meta-analysis course. He taught one course a year because he was an associate, he was a adjunct professor. And I assumed that since I had all of my coursework done and all those term papers and such, that I was an excellent paper writer. And I would, write draft work on papers with him once he hired me at OPM, because I turned in my homework in meta-analysis with SAS code, because I didn't want to fiddle with calculators and stuff. And he said, "Oh, you know how to program." And then he hires me because he needed a Fortran programmer. And I explained I didn't know Fortran. He said, "You can pick it up." So I learned Fortran over a series of months and was able to do what he wanted me to do. But when we were working on papers together, I'd give him a paper and he would hand it back and said, "Yeah, I have a few revisions for you to do." And there was no white space left, the margins, the back of the paper. And he just said, "Here you go. I made some suggestions." But he'd write, "This is wrong." But he never wrote, "This is wrong, you're an idiot," or "What are you doing?" And he's very respectful, and he just says, "You got to redo that." So I did that, and over time, I knew the paper was ready when he couldn't write on it anymore. He just said, "Okay, we can ship it now." So I learned a lot in terms of writing with him as well. And I think those are the stories I want to give you. Thank you. I don't know how I got gray hair. It's always dark.
Hi, everybody. I fall into what Denise was describing as the fourth decade of publications with Frank, but I actually worked with Frank for a little over 3 decades. Collaborated with him. I'm with Gallup, and we have a ton of data, but I remember one of my first jobs in my early 20s, and was finishing my PhD program, and I got a job at Gallup, and this is in Lincoln, Nebraska. And one of the first jobs that I got, Don Clifton, he gave me a duffel bag full of cards with a bunch of statistics on them, and he asked me to build a database. And these were all structured interview questions, right? So Don had this intuition that these questions were working across different studies. And I had no idea how to build a database, but somehow I figured it out with some partnerships. But anyway, Frank came into the picture. Don asked Frank to come to Gallup and not only conduct a meta-analysis of these piles of predictive validity studies that we had, but he also asked him to teach us some courses. The first one, Ted Hayes is in here, he was with me in these courses. at the time was meta-analysis methods, methods of meta-analysis. Second was, I believe, personnel psychology, and the third was individual differences. And they fit right into helping us make sense out of all the things we've been learning about individual strengths, how people respond to different environments, culture, and job attitudes. And it happened to be that even though Frank published a meta-analysis in personal psych of our structured interview studies, we spent most of our time studying job attitudes and how job attitudes predict performance. But the thing that I'll remember the most about Frank and the biggest impact he had on me was that he was a combination of the clearest teacher that I ever came across. And this is after going through a lot of education over the years. He taught really complex methods in a very clear way that I could grasp and make sense out of and apply. And the second thing was that he really wanted to see his work applied in the world. And I think we've given, our work combined with his gives us a chance to impact a lot of people's lives and organizations. And I think as we think about how his work carries on into the future, I think it'll just multiply. We've conducted 19 meta-analysis studies with his methods, but on different constructs that we study. But inside of those studies are thousands of individual meta-analyses. So we've now taken his work and programmed it in such a way to build some efficiency so we can churn out meta-analyses very quickly. So his methods are like everyday work at Gallup. Meta-analysis is everyday language at Gallup now because of what he did. But the other thing, on the personal side, Frank, I'd have him over to my place. He'd come to all the way to Lincoln to teach us these classes. They're full credit courses. And I wanted to cut some of the time off of his travels. I said, why don't, instead of always meeting in Nebraska, why don't I come to Iowa, we'll meet at Iowa, University of Iowa or something. And he said, no, you're going to stay at my house. And I did that at least 5 times, brought some of my colleagues some of the time. And he was always just such a great host. We got to know him well. In the evenings, we got to know Kentucky bourbon pretty well, the different flavors. And the one that I'll always remember, he said, it's the best. This is the best advice I can give you on Kentucky bourbon. The best bottom shelf Kentucky bourbon is the Old Crow. And he's right. It's a smooth one. By the way, we could not find it in Chicago. So I don't know. I could find it in Ashland, Nebraska, but I can't find it in Chicago. But anyway, Frank made a big impact on me through the methods that he taught, which, my background was in psychometrics. And the methods he taught around generalizability and correcting for measurement error and all the things that go into psychometric meta-analysis seriously changed how I think, and it changed how I evolved as a researcher. And I think a lot of people can probably say those same things. But so that combination of just a personable, clear teacher, I love getting in, heated discussions with him. Sometimes too, I think he respected you more when you got into those discussions with him. He always told the truth. He always stood up for the truth, and he taught us all things that I think will last will multiply through the people that we mentor going into the future. And really appreciated the opportunity to know him for 3 decades. Thank you.
All right, my name is Ben Postlethwaite, and I'm at Pepperdine University, and I'm going to say a few things that will echo the last 2 speakers. I was Frank's last PhD student at Iowa, and apparently he was very consistent because I have a full stack of papers that have wrong written on them. And I cherish them to this day. Now I lead our university's Center for Teaching Excellence, and I can unabashedly say that Frank was an excellent teacher. From the first class I had with him, which was individual differences, he didn't just communicate information, and it was great, up-to-date information. He changed the way you thought. And that continues with me today, that difference in the way you think. He made you want to rise to his high standard. Although you knew you weren't going to meet it, you did everything you could to come as close as possible. So his measurement class was the most challenging class I think I took. And I can't tell you the number of hours I spent studying for it just so I wouldn't appear an idiot when I took the final exam, which was an unlimited time exam, which I think went 6 to 8 hours. And he finally kind of said, okay, are you done yet? But he gets deservedly a lot of credit for his research. But now being in the position of evaluating teachers, he was an excellent teacher. And I think he continues to be through his students and through his work. Frank did not need to say anything to communicate meaning. It often came with just a raised eyebrow. I will cherish those raised eyebrows and kind of skeptical glances. He is one of the most fearless advocates for his students, and once you had gained his confidence, he was forever in your corner, whether that was a personal matter or an academic one. I've never seen someone who will stand up for students more than Frank Schmidt. He knew what it took to kind of get you out of your comfort zone and develop you. I remember, I believe it was a 2012 SIOP perhaps in New York, where I believe it's a paper with Insu on interviews, and it was in a giant ballroom. It was advertised as a Frank Schmidt section, and it was completely full, probably 300-400 people, and he told me, no, you present this paper. So apologies to those 300 folks who expected to get Frank Schmidt. He thought that would be a great developmental experience, and it was. So that's the type of guy that I remember. Thanks.